So we got some great questions today. The main one is on oilcloth. Thanks for joining us today. So a question came in on Facebook, a general question about oilcloth in the 18th century. And you can see here, I've got a shelter back here, and the cloth that's on top of this is oilcloth. And oilcloth is one of those things in the 18th century that they used as a waterproof covering. And I don't know how often they necessarily used it on, say, tents. I don't think we actually see oilcloth tents per se, but occasionally you'll find oilcloths referenced in small shelter situations. And many times you would use oilcloth for ground cloth situations. You might also use oilcloth for certain parts of your garment to shed water, or as a smaller piece of cloth, you would wrap up documents, other things that you wanted to protect from water. Now the question is, what is oilcloth in the 18th century? How did they make it? And this particular piece of oilcloth I made a couple of months ago, and oilcloth actually is pretty simple. A fairly tight woven cloth, a tighter woven the better if you can find it, and that gets coated with a mixture of linseed oil and generally a filler of some sort. And in this case, one of the popular fillers was iron oxide, powdered iron oxide. And what it does is it goes in and kind of fills all the pores of the fabric. And boiled linseed oil, which is the other ingredient here, is an item that as it oxidizes, it turns into a polymer, basically, a very primitive polymer. Sort of, it's exactly like what oil-based paints were like in the 18th century. If you go back and you watch the Gary Zaradka, he was an oil painter, somebody who painted portraits, and he talks about making the paints for those portraits, and they were just made with boiled linseed oil and a pigment. And in his case, he would use all these, amazingly interesting colors, like ground up mummies or whatever. In this case, we use something super simple, which is basically rust, iron oxide powdered, and this gets painted onto the fabric, and over several weeks or even longer, it slowly turns into this waterproof cloth. It's such a great little project to do, kind of get you in the mood and making a part of your kit if you're going to go out, especially if you're going to go out camping in the woods and you want to make your own cloth to do that with, whether it's a ground cloth or a cloth like this. Now the bad part about oilcloths in the 18th century or even today is that they're not protected from flames. So today's tents that are made, even cotton tents like the ones we sell, they have a special coating on the outside that makes them fire resistant. Not that they're fireproof, but that they won't just burst into flames. Unfortunately, something like oilcloth, yeah, it just basically bursts into flames. So if you make something like a shelter like this and you use it in a tent situation, you'll definitely want to make sure it's a long way away from the fire so that it doesn't catch on fire, which would be a really bad thing. But it is so much fun to be able to make your own tent in this sort of circumstance and experience that, going out in the woods, setting up your camp and sleeping underneath a tent that you made yourself. We also have some follow-up questions on the kitchen. We have so many questions from the kitchen. Here's Matt D. He says, how did you build your authentic kitchen? Did you do it yourself? What were the materials used? How long did it take you to learn the skills needed to cook in a colonial kitchen? What were the consistent problems you have? Is the kitchen safe? What hazards does a colonial cook have? If you're going to cook 3 meals a day, how long would that take? How much wood would it take? How many calories did the cook? Wow, it just goes on and on. He's got a lot of questions. I'm gonna have to hold you on that and just answer a first couple of ones here. How did I build the authentic kitchen? The kitchen is based on, obviously, the one in Stanton, Virginia. I'll say it right for you guys, in Virginia. I had to adapt a building I already had. I didn't have a stone building or an infill building. I think that's like a posted beam building. So I had to, make the walls work the way I did. So they're just plain walls covered with a stucco coating to get that feel of that sort of a building. So I just used the kind of construction skills that I already had in my skill set to build that kitchen and make it look the way it does. And yes, I basically did that kitchen all myself over a couple of months period in the winter time, knowing, because we had done the first season of cooking episodes outdoors, that winter was coming, and if I wanted to keep doing kitchen cooking episodes, I needed to have an indoor place to do them, and so I had to build my own, as it were, 18th century kitchen. And the materials are mainly just, stucco. I used a lot of chicken wire. You can't see that, of course, but chicken wire and OSB and mortar mix to make up the kitchen, to make it look, and some walnut boards that I had laying around that were probably 20 years old to give it the right kind of look. And I had a lot of fun. Well, I had a lot of fun building the kitchen. I'll try to cover some of more of those questions that have to do with the kitchen in the future, but I don't want to bore you with the 20 minutes about the kitchen in this episode. I've got another question. This one is about hygiene. What level of cleanliness was acceptable in the kitchen? Did they care if their produce had bugs in it? Additionally, now it seems that we toss anything that's a little brown or has a bruise in it, but what was it like then? I think it's a really good question, and obviously it's different for different people in the 18th century. There were some folks that probably are quite willing to throw away things that weren't quite right. Although I'll bet that most people did not waste anything. And in fact, in many of the cookbooks you find, and when we look at cookbooks in this, especially 18th century cookbooks, English cookbooks, we're actually looking at cookbooks for fairly well-to-do people. Poor people didn't use cookbooks. They learned their cooking skills, what cooking skills they had from the previous generation, and so they didn't really need cookbooks per se. But even in these sort of high-class cookbooks, you'll find many references to using stale bread, or in the case of something like how to deal with stinking meat, right? So the meat had gone bad, but they have recipes about how to deal with this meat that's gone bad. They did not throw it out. And these were people that were fairly well-to-do. So I don't think cleanliness or, attack from vermin made people throw food items out. They cut off what they needed to, and they used it. And there are, many references to folks that are in, much worse situations, soldiers or whatnot, dealing with pieces of meat that were just definitely way past anything that we would consider edible. And they had to make do. They had to eat what they had available, or they would starve. So I don't think they were very terribly concerned about hygiene generally. Now, when it comes to sort of the aesthetics of eating, the taste of it, there were certainly many people that said things like, oh, it's better to have a woman cook because they keep things cleaner and that makes the things taste better. So there was a certain amount of let's make sure that things are clean so that the things that we're cooking taste better. Maybe they weren't terribly worried about safety per se, but they wanted things to taste good. So many great questions, so many great comments, so much great encouragement. I really want to thank everyone for all the encouragement that we get on the channel through comments. You can encourage us just by watching the videos, by sharing the videos. All that is important to be able to continue to get up and do videos over and over again. And I love doing these videos. I have so much fun learning about doing these things, whether it's making oilcloth or digging into the cookbooks, reading these 18th century journals, kind of getting into people's lives and understanding what they were thinking, what they were doing, and then you actually do some of that yourself. You cook some of that yourself. You experience some of these same places, some of these same experiences that they had. That getting back in touch with history like that, getting in touch with basically our history, it's so important for understanding where we've come from, where we're going. We need to do that. We need to do that a lot more. Even that circumstance where I was talking about poor people not having cookbooks and learning from the previous generation. I've been thinking about that a lot recently, about how we don't pass on all the knowledge we could. We don't have apprenticeships like we used to. You know, children don't necessarily follow in the footsteps of their parents learning those same kinds of skills, even if it's just cooking. We have to do that more. It's so important. I want to encourage you in that, and I want to thank you for all your amazing support. When you comment, when you thumbs up and share our videos, when you support us through Patreon or go to the website. Thank you so much for all the support you give us, and thanks for watching.